everybody, and welcome to Star Wars Lads. Today, we are going to be talking about The Princess and the Scoundrel, the latest novel from Beth Revis, about Han Solo and Princess Leia's wedding, as well as their honeymoon on the Halcyon, the hotel at Star Wars Land in Florida. So, we are going to dive into the novel, both a non spoiler review and then a spoiler review towards the end if you haven't seen one of our book reviews. It's the same format we always do, but we will start with non spoilers and we'll let you guys know when spoilers start. But before we do so, please hit that like button down below and subscribe to our channel for continued Star Wars content. If you like Star Wars books, we do talk about every new release Star Wars novel, as well as a ton of legends. If you want to check out both our novels and books playlists, we have all of our book reviews we've ever done. We also have a Legends playlist as well as a Legends Book Club playlist if you're interested in any of that. So subscribe to our channel for more of that content. If you haven't yet, hit that like button. Help us get to 15 likes on this video. It'll really help us out with the YouTube algorithm. And then comment below. Let us know what you thought of The Princess and the Scoundrel. Is this a book that you really liked? Did you like it more than Courtship or Princess Leia? If you haven't read it yet, are you interested in reading it now that you heard a non-spoiler review? Let us know all that stuff down in the comments below. So let's dive into the video. First of all, we're going to start with kind of our initial impressions, our first thoughts, having just read this book, some of the positives that you liked about the book. Sanak, what were your positives that you took away after reading this?
Well, this is a book about like the romance and the wedding of Leia and Han, and I, compared to what we got in Legends, this is a ridiculous step up. I think that is the core point. That's the selling point, making this a book. I believe even when we're at Celebration, this was like the one that everyone's like, it's so beautiful, it's so well written. Like, Beth Revis, I don't think was actually at Celebration, but all the other authors were giving props to panelists. They were just saying, yeah, like this is a book that we all adore, and I can see why, because while it's not like ultimately like a huge story, it feels like a great, loving, mature relationship that we kind of all saw happening, in the gap between 4 and 5. It's kind of understated. We have comics and books to kind of fill that in. But once the declaration of love happens, Han is gone for a year, and Leia and Luke spend all their time trying to get him, but as well as seeing with all this other rebellion stuff. And then Endor happens, they free him. It's loving and wonderful that the whole gang's back together, but there's still that question of like, oh, they both declared their love. Han's iconic, I know, right? So what does he know? Like what is like real about this relationship? And it's all this intimate moments that could have just been written like a story and then like, oh, here's a moment they share together that could have worked for the book. But I think I was a lot more pleased by Beth Revis deciding to go with every chapter being a POV. It's Han and Leia. They are very different people. She nails the tone for each character. I don't think anyone's written Han this well in canon. He's not just a scoundrel. Like the whole point of him is that he's a scoundrel with the heart of gold, and it shines through this book. And as much as they're different people, it's their differences that really make them such a strong and unique couple. And seeing how like they both instinctively know what someone else is going through, it's like the shared looks, the body language. It was things that I think other materials that reference their marriage, in Legends and canon both, that didn't really get. Like, marriage and love isn't just about what you say or do with each other. It's like about those little tiny quirks, those little quips, those little twitches of the eyes. It was like there's a lot of like visual language in a relationship that was always there in the movies, but never really translated over to this text-based medium, at least for in my opinion over the last 20 years. But this is like the one where I was like, yeah, this feels like a very rich relationship, even if it is in real time, maybe like what, 3 weeks for Han at best, right? Of like really declared love. And for Leia, it's like, yeah, it's a year and 3 weeks, but 1 year of me like holding on to that burden of loving someone who is gone, who's been ripped away from me. And they both deal with a lot of that stuff in their different, like Han with his carbonite freezing, Leia with her role as someone emerging into now this new republic. What does that mean to play in this political game once more, this social game, as opposed to just being a fighter and rebel? Han kind of dealing with like, hey, what do I do now? What my character feeling like I've been stagnating. Luke's now not some kid. He's a full-grown calm Jedi. Leia is like this huge leader who's been doing all these crazy things that connect to my past that I don't even know about. And that could have made this a story that I think could have been like a lot of catching up, but they just don't. They just know what they have with each other and they just let it develop. And making this like an immediate marriage could have just been like, okay, let's have the bicker back and forth, but they really don't. I don't think there's anything that's like a very serious bickering. It's like there's a joy in them knowing that they're right for each other, even though they're very different people, different statuses, different positions, different futures. But they're like, yeah, but when we're put together, there's nothing better. And I think Beth Revis made that very clear at every chapter that even in the moments that when crazy things are happening, they're able to like give each other a warm embrace, a little quick kiss, share some thoughts, hold each other's hands, all the things that you expect from a couple in a long-term relationship, in a marriage, which they don't have, but they've had years together. And I think she really intertwines everything that has built up before it all came crashing down in Empire and brought it back full swing and reached a new level that I don't think will be topped.
And piggybacking off of that, I think the best decision that was made here was to write every other chapter from each of their perspectives. You get both Han and Leia's perspective, and they alternate each chapter. And I thought that was such a fantastic choice because it allows you to really get under their skin both in the happy moments, but also in the moments they do bicker or they do fight. You get to see how Han feels about what they just had, but then you also get to see how Leia took that side. And I think both of these characters are super well written, very true to the films and very true to the rest of the extended material. This is a book that you don't need to have read anything else in canon to read this. You can have just seen, the original trilogy, but it does tie in and actually reference a ton of things, including all the current Star Wars comics that are going on right now. But between that Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi timeline, it references a lot of that stuff. It references old things. It references things that could come to pass. There's a lot of things that are in here that you can really pick up on if you are somebody who's into canon like us. We'll talk more about those in the spoiler section, the details, but I appreciated that these are really well-rounded versions of Han and Leia from all of canon and not just hyper focused on one particular thing or way they act in the films. This is a true progression of their characters, and I think that's really highlighted by the way that they divide the chapters and the way you get. There's one particular moment, probably at the end of the first act, where Han and Leia do have a fight that's short lasting, but you get immediately when it's wrapping up, it starts from Han's perspective, and he's like, "Well, I know I'm right, and she knows I'm right." And then after that, she's like, "Well, I was right, and Han was wrong." Kind of, you get her perspective and his perspective, and you get to see, why they both believe the way uh, they were acting is justified. I also really love the wedding in particular. They were hyping that up so much at Star Wars Celebration. And this book in general, I wasn't necessarily sure how much I personally was going to love it. And I wasn't sure if just the genre was going to not land with me as well as, something like Shadow of the Sith, which is like meant for my tastes in Star Wars. But I thought this book was really fun. I laughed a lot while reading it. I don't usually laugh while reading books. There's a lot of really good humor, especially with Han or with some of our original trilogy characters, when they're put into situations or when they're reacting to situations that are around them that are affecting their personal lives. I found a lot of it very funny. Rivas has a really quick wit with the way she writes Han, especially, and I think a lot of it made me chuckle. And the wedding, which does take place pretty quickly at the beginning of the book. It is definitely something that it is in the first like 12 chapters, and then it's done. And most of the book is the honeymoon, but I thought that was extremely well written, both from a comedic standpoint, but also it felt impactful and meaningful, and like it was given a lot of care and time, and something that was important to the Star Wars universe, which it very much so is. Let's dive into negatives, though. There aren't too many for me, but what were your thoughts on anything you didn't like about this book?
I mean, it's really hard to say there was anything that was like downright like it threw me off in my reading experience where like the book halted. And it was a quick read, like a lot of these more recent canon books have been. The pacing was great. I I think if there was like a negative, it was that I wanted it to be longer. I really did. I think it's because it's a lot of this book, well, all of the book is really just about switching back and forth between the POVs, and there's not really too much overlap other than just like the endings. Endings are the beginnings of another POV between the chapters. Um, that it just flies by. Like the story is never like halted to get the other person's complete perspective. It's like, okay, because they're so in sync, because they're so in love with each other, they understand what the other person's saying. Here's what I'm adding to it. Okay, we're on different parts of this journey on this honeymoon. Okay, that's fun. Now let's bring us to what Leia was doing at the same time. Nope, we're actually just gonna have it right after whatever Han was doing. Like there was never anything that was holding back the pacing. So when we come to the ending after having a story that's a little bit more traditional Star Wars about like, okay, what did these two characters do to kind of save the day using both of their strengths? It ends, and as much as it was a fun read, I wish they got to finish the book with a little bit more of a honeymoon. I think there's a core point of the story that say that in this time and moment they gotta have their marriage. It was just for them, and all those who lost everything could enjoy it because they deserved it. At the end of the day, we know the end of their stories. We know everything that's come before. This is a moment in time that, like, yes, even in this time that was meant for them, they still are doing things that help the galaxy. They're still working together as a team instead of necessarily as like a couple. And that's great. That's just what the galaxy calls for them. That's what the force calls for both of them. But let them have a little bit more fun in the sun, right? That's all I really wanted, and that's where a little bit of the ending felt like nice little quickly wrapped bow on top. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just a personal preference that it came down to for me.
Yeah, I think for me, I have similar things that were I don't think there were anything that I didn't like about this book. I didn't think there was anything, like you said, that's flat out was like, this took me out of it or this did not work. I thought the whole thing worked because similar to Brotherhood in a way, this is a character book. This is led by Han and Leia, and this is all about because you get everything from their perspectives, it never shifts to any other characters. It's just them. So you're either all Han's perspective and then Leia's in Han's perspective, or you're all Leia's perspective and Han's in Leia's perspective. You never go to anyone else. And I think in that way, similar to how Brotherhood shifted back and forth between Anakin and Obi-Wan, that's what keeps the book and the plot that might not be so grand or so exciting together because you like learning things about each character from the other character's perspective, and then when they're thrown into events where they have to experience certain things, you like to see how they think about how they're going to react or how they're thinking about the other person in that certain situation. That's what kept it together for the most part for me. But this book to me really feels like three specific acts. There's the wedding, there's the Halcyon legacy, and then there's the planet that they go to. The ice planet to me was the weakest by far of the three. Like that was the stuff where we start to get more traditional Star Warsy to where it just didn't feel as unique as fun. And it oddly enough, you would think the Halcyon would be the weakest part because it's definitely like the corporate synergy section of the book. But I actually really enjoyed the Halcyon stuff. I thought all the characters that populated it were fun. I thought the way Han and Leia interact on the ship was fun. And even though nothing like big really happens during that, I enjoyed it because we got a lot more quiet moments with them. Like you were saying, we needed a few more quiet moments where the end then shifts in its third act to we now have a threat that we have to deal with and like an actual ex- excitement to lend to this book rather than just the romance, which I was pretty much okay with just it being a romance novel and not really going anywhere. If it's just the two characters bouncing their POVs off each other really because this book does such a great job too with Han of really going into the fact that he has not existed in a year. Like he's been frozen and so many things has happened to Leia or Chewbacca. Like there's a little moment where Leia and Chewbacca are saying goodbye to each other and he's like, when did they become great friends? Oh, I've been gone for a year. And there's a lot of time where Han's dealing with that and Beth Revis does a great job of showing that, but at the same time, those are the most interesting parts of it for me. So when we get to like rebel empire or like bad guys type thing going on in the last third of the book, then it just kind of felt like it wasn't getting as deep as I feel like I was in the first two thirds. But that was really the only thing that I not necessarily even didn't like, but just thought it was lesser than with the rest of the book because I felt like the first two thirds of this book were super high quality and way exceeding my expectation. Anyway, let's get to our final thoughts now here that you've heard our positives and our negatives. What are your final thoughts and score out of five for The Princess and the Scoundrel?
The Princess and the Scoundrel is a very fitting title. It is about their positions, their roles. It reflects a lot about their personalities and their values. And it's not an ideal match on paper, but Han and Leia never were. And yet that's what makes it so nice and endearing to see it work in both the films and now finally in the books as well. The marriage was beautiful. I really loved it. It was really sweet and funny. The Halcyon could have been something so dreary and just like, look at this cool thing on our hotel. Oh, sorry, our ship in Star Wars. But it wasn't. It was just like a nice, like, intermediate staging ground for those first little brushes between these characters who have deep love for each other, but are quite honestly going very quickly into a marriage. And then, yeah, the third part was more, classic Empire, Rebels. But again, as always, even that slightly lesser third act was carried by these two showing concern and doing these things for each other, and always, even in the worst of times, holding each other, embracing each other, find the joy, happiness, love, seeing those little things that make each other's eyes light up, their smiles. It was just nice seeing two characters that have always been stated as being in love and then really seeing why and seeing their thoughts for it. So I would honestly give this book a 3.75. Again, third act isn't bad, but it's not as great as the first two.
I agree with that for sure. And it is a book that, like you said, very well paced, very interesting read, very fun read. You not want to really stop. There's no boring part of this novel, and whether you get a different facet of Han and Leia three different times, really in three different acts, each one is interesting in its own way. I just found the first two more interesting than the last. I think similar to Brotherhood, I did love the perspective here, and where I thought the business on Katie and Nemoidia was a more interesting overall plot than the third act in particular of this. It wasn't necessarily what drove Brotherhood. The characters were the reason I really did end up loving Brotherhood, and the characters were the reasons I did end up really, really liking this book. For me, I had this book really high at the beginning. I was really, truly loving this, and then I think as the plot progressed and got a little bit more traditional, it did drop a little bit for me. But I will still give it a 3.75 as well out of five. And also shout out to the audiobook as well. It is voiced by two people this time, two Star Wars veterans. Definitely check out the audiobook if you're interested because they both alternate in the Han and Leia chapters to voice each character. So, anyway, those are our non spoiler thoughts on The Princess and the Scoundrel. Let us know down below if you have not read it yet. Are you now interested in reading it after hearing our thoughts? Let us know if you have read it and then what you would give it out of five also down below. We're going to transition into spoilers right now and talk about some of the things here. Similar to some of these last few books we talked about, there's nothing here that's really just like, oh, we got to talk about it. Like Shadow of the Sith had a ton of things we had to talk about. Spoilers. This one is a pretty straightforward plot. We gave, they gave most of it away in the premise. It's Han and Leia's wedding and then Han and Leia's honeymoon. But there are, as you can see, even from the cover, Imperials that they have to fight and all these different things going on. And I think for me in particular, you did touch on Courtship of Princess Leia. There is a nice little Easter egg thrown into this where Han at the beginning is like he's talking to Mon Mothma or something. He's like, I might have to kidnap her and take her somewhere to, force her to have a honeymoon and marry me. And it's like, yeah, that's definitely a shot at the Courtship of Princess Leia. But I think for me, the number one thing I want to bring up here, and I think you're welcome to bring up any other spoilers that you can think of as well, is the Leia Jedi stuff. And I really, really like that at the beginning of the novel with Leia's conversations with Luke, in particular. Immediately post like the Darth Vader funeral pyre, we get to see her actually go up to where he was burned, and she's shouting at him, and really focuses on the fact that she was tortured by her father, and now this is all flooding he she finds out about this, days before this book starts, and right before the Battle of Endor. So she's really just coming to grips with all this and the fact that Luke's her brother and just everything. Luke is being very kind of not pushy, but he's like, you need to be a Jedi. And she's like, I don't know if I can be a Jedi. And I think this gives a lot more justification for ultimately the decision to not make her a Jedi in the sequels and see her lane as a politician. And I think this does a great job of establishing kind of the further mindset that's explored in something like Bloodline, which I think is phenomenal, especially with the recurring theme of like, how do I tell Han Vader's my father? How do I tell the galaxy when the galaxy finds out the Vader's my father? I got to do everything that I possibly can before my career is ruined and my life is ruined because people will hate me after that. And she's like, I don't really blame them. I also really like the little nod that Revis gives at the end too, with Leia acknowledging that well, it would be a pretty cool statement if I were a Jedi and a politician at the same time. Like, people would really respect me there. I think that's a nice little nod to Legends to be like, there's still room to do Leia Jedi stories. And we know from The Rise of Skywalker that she did train as a Jedi and left her lightsaber with Luke. But there's still room for maybe some type of Luke adventure early in canon, maybe when Ben is either really young or maybe even off at Luke's Jedi Temple where Leia could come back and actually participate in some type of Jedi stuff. That type of stuff got me my wheels, the gears turning in my head. I was pretty excited about just more and more hints at Leia stuff. And we also get to see Leia really use the Force for the first time in this book. Anyway, any thoughts on that or any other type of spoilers you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of jump onto the whole Darth Vader thing, she brings it up quite a few times, kind of like how Han brings up the carbonite freezing. I still think the biggest joy for me with Han here, other than just the fact that he got to use his charming scoundrel ways in the appropriate situations instead of just like making a silly quip and being angry. Like, it was like he used it to be like flirtatious or like, and you knew when to turn it off and just be honest and true with Leia. So those things I really liked. But the biggest thing that I liked outside of like having both these characters acknowledge like the waters where it says freezing us like the carbonite, acknowledging that the carbonite freezing was more painful than a seamless thing that like it looked like. It didn't see. They had always talked about how it was a crude setup, so I like them acknowledging like, no, it was crude and it hurt for sure. And Han could still be blind if we're not careful. Like, I like them taking some considerations there. But I think my biggest thing that I liked for Han on his end was that it's like the first time I've seen any story like acknowledge that Han was pretty stagnant in Return of the Jedi. Like Harrison Ford, the whole story goes that he wanted Han to be killed off to give some emotional value to some impetus to Luke and Leia and the rest of the story. And I don't necessarily disagree, but when George obviously said no, the rest of the performance does feel kind of phoned in at times. He does feel like he's doing a lot more of a New Hope uh, impression at times. He has a little bit of like the Empire Strikes Back developments in him, but nothing too incredibly rich. Just more of like a funny wisecracking guy being like, "I don't know what just happened. I'm awake after a year. Oh, well, what? Oh, okay, this is happening. Okay. I'm a general. Sure, why not? Like, he's a guy who's just kind of thrust into these things, but when action demands it, Han's gonna do what he has to do. But now that this is a time where he actually is pursuing a future, trying to develop, trying to change as a man. I like that he himself acknowledged, like, yeah, Leia and Chewie are best friends. Like, Luke is a Jedi. Like, what am I gonna do? Like, what have I lost in this 1 year? I lost a love that apparently has been connecting us for a whole year that only one person got to deal with, and for her, it was like a burden that in the book is like described like a chain that weighed her down. Like, I like this them acknowledging that side for Han and kind of pushing a little bit of the urgency of this marriage too. Like, you know what? Like, now or never. This is the one moment that we can steal away before we know the Empire is going to start, you know, entering into a bigger foray, get crazier. The whole aftermath trilogy with Gallius Rex and Battle of Jakku, all those things are going to happen now or never because we didn't apparently stop all the transmissions from the Endor base, which is also a nice little tie in there that I appreciated, building up some stuff for the sequels. So that was great for on Han's end. On Leia's end, yes, I love the chapter where she's like called I think almost by Vader's spirit. Um, and I like that she didn't connect with Vader, obviously, because that would just be like, oh god, this is gonna be like a really messy situation. And if there was a connection between her and Anakin at this point, after seeing in Shadow of the Sith how hard it was for Anakin to reach out to Luke, it's like, okay, well, I'm glad they were very subtle that even Anakin realizes, yeah, I kind of screwed over my daughter, destroyed her planet and all that. I should probably just I pulled her because I'm good again, but she instantly rejects it. I thought that was probably the best chapter of the whole book for me. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think the whole material that's being mined on, I think the planet's Mardus, the ice moon, that they're on, it feels like it's set up for, and they make this interesting connection of like, oh, this was only put into effect a year ago when Luke had just started his training with Yoda. It was like some one-off line there, but it got me thinking that like, okay, so obviously the Emperor wanted to have Luke once he discovered him, seeing that he got some free training out of Yoda to replace Vader. Was his original plan to have Luke by his side, and what was he building in the Outer Rims and in the unknown regions? Was he going to use this material to create more Death Stars, or is this meant for the Star Destroyers on Exegol? Like, it seemed like they were trying to find different. Like Leia even acknowledges, like Palpatine has these different end games built up that I didn't even realize were in play. So that it was a nice little touch there. I wish they went deeper for that and Leia's like internal connection with the Force, how she realized that's how she connected to it by looking in, closing her eyes instead of trying to reach out and control like Vader did. Yeah, I mean, there's not too many spoilers. It's more of just the framing of each character that I really enjoyed and the connections that they made with the films to let this be a moment in time and encapsulate them and also hint at like, yeah, they've got careers that they can't just abandon that are going to shape them more than they'd like and pull them apart. But at least this way we can acknowledge the films, we can acknowledge that this happened, we can acknowledge the future. It was nice in that way.
Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. Let us know down in the comments below how much you liked this book, what you liked, what was your favorite part of this novel. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It really, really will help us out. We're on our way to 1,000 subs. We're getting there progressively closer every single day. So if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel and you love Star Wars, if you love Star Wars novels, love Star Wars Legends novels, canon novels, all of it, we cover everything Star Wars here on the channel in a variety of videos. So check out all of that stuff in our playlists and across our whole channel. And make sure you're subscribed here to keep around with Star Wars Lads. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.